Subscribe to my YouTube channel for more heartwarming stories that will make you believe in love, kindness, and second chances. The cafe was buzzing with the usual evening crowd. Clinking cups, soft chatter, the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table. James Harrington, the billionaire CEO of Harrington Enterprises, sat in the corner, nursing his coffee while scrolling through emails on his phone. He had come here on a whim, needing a break from the never-ending cycle of board meetings, profit, margins, and corporate expectations. The smell of freshly baked pastries and the warmth of the cafe felt oddly comforting, a stark contrast to his high-rise office with its cold floor-to-ceiling windows. He was used to being recognized in places like these: whispers, stolen glances, the occasional bold approach from someone wanting a business opportunity or a selfie. But he hadn't expected a small voice to break through his thoughts so directly. "Hey, sir." James looked up, startled. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, stood in front of him. He had a mop of messy brown hair and wide, curious eyes that gleamed with mischief. His winter jacket was slightly oversized, making him look even smaller, but the confidence in his stance was undeniable. James blinked, lowering his phone. Hello there." The boy rocked back on his heels, grinning. "I think my mom wants to ask you out." Silence. James wasn't often caught off guard, but this was unexpected. He stared at the boy, unsure if he had misheard. A couple sitting at a nearby table snickered, clearly overhearing the exchange. James cleared his throat, glancing around, half expecting this to be some kind of prank. "Your mom wants to ask me out," he repeated slowly, as if saying the words out loud would make them make sense. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "Yup, but she's kinda shy. She thinks you're like way out of her league or something." He scrunched his nose, which is weird, 'cause she's awesome. James felt an amused smile tug at the corner of his lips. He set his coffee down. "And does your mom know you're telling me this?" The boy hesitated, then shrugged. "Not exactly, but she's been looking at you every time we come here. And when I said I was gonna come talk to you, she turned all red and told me not to." He grinned. "So I figured that meant I should." James let out a quiet chuckle, rubbing his jaw. This was definitely not how his evening was supposed to go. He glanced around again, this time searching for the mysterious mother. There, near the counter, a woman stood frozen in place, her eyes wide in absolute horror. James followed the boy's gaze and saw her. And for a moment, everything else in the cafe faded into the background. She was beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention, but held it nonetheless. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands falling around her face. She wore a simple sweater, jeans, and a scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. But there was something about her: warmth, familiarity, an air of quiet strength. Her eyes locked onto his, and he saw a mixture of embarrassment, disbelief, and a silent plea for the earth to swallow her whole. James suppressed another chuckle. "I take it that's your mom?" he asked, tilting his head toward her. The boy beamed. "Yup, that's Claire. And I'm Ethan." He extended a hand like a miniature businessman. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Harrington." James shook his hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Nice to meet you too, Ethan." From across the cafe, Claire finally sprang into action. She hurried over, her face still flushed, and placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan," she hissed in a whisper that wasn't really a whisper. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. He has no filter, I swear." James held up a hand, still smiling. "It's okay. He's just looking out for you." Claire groaned, covering her face with one hand. "I cannot believe this is happening." Ethan grinned up at her. "You're welcome, Mom." James watched the interaction, intrigued. There was an ease between them, a natural closeness that spoke of years spent as a team. It made something deep inside him stir, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He leaned back in his chair, still amused. "So, Claire, do you want to ask me out?" Claire made a strangled sound in her throat. What? No. I mean, not that I wouldn't, but oh my God, Ethan. Ethan just grinned, utterly unbothered by his mother's internal crisis. "I told you, Mom. Just go for it." James chuckled, watching Claire struggle for words. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him like this, not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but just as a man. And for the first time in years, he felt something entirely unfamiliar, yet oddly welcome. Curiosity. The question now was, would Claire take the leave? Claire felt like she was standing in the middle of a spotlight, with the entire cafe as her audience. She had never been more embarrassed in her life. Ethan, completely unfazed, looked proud of himself, as if he had just solved the biggest problem in the world. She shot him a look. "We're going home, right now." But before she could turn away, James Harrington, billionaire CEO, the man she had seen 100 times on TV, in magazines, on business news segments, leaned forward slightly, his eyes still on her, a small amused smile playing on his lips. "So," he said, "are you going to?" Claire's stomach flipped. She knew what he meant, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Instead, she let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. I'm really sorry. He's just got this habit of saying whatever comes to his mind." Ethan piped up, undeterred. "Only when it's true." James chuckled, resting his chin on his hand. "He's got confidence. That's a good thing." Claire's heart pounded. She wasn't sure what to do, what to say. A part of her wanted to grab Ethan and run straight out of the cafe, never to return. But another part, one she hadn't felt in a long time, was telling her to stay. She had noticed James before. Of course she had. He had been coming to this cafe more often in the past few weeks, always sitting at the same table, always with the same focused expression as he worked through whatever billion-dollar decisions CEOs made. She had told herself it was silly to even look at him for more than a second. He was untouchable. A man like him didn't exist in her world. But Ethan had shattered that invisible wall with a few innocent words. James seemed to pick up on her hesitation. He leaned back, his expression thoughtful now. "Tell you what," he said, "I owe Ethan here for making me smile after a long day. Let me buy you both a coffee. Or, well, maybe a hot chocolate for you," he added, glancing at Ethan. Ethan lit up. "Yes, I love hot chocolate." Claire hesitated, glancing toward the exit. She knew she should say no. She barely knew this man, beyond what the media portrayed. But right now, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't some untouchable business mogul. He was just a man sitting in a cafe, offering to buy her a coffee. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to say yes. She sighed, looking down at Ethan, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Then, finally she turned to James. "Okay, but just coffee." James smiled. Just coffee. They sat at a table near the window. The city lights were just beginning to glow as the sun dipped below the skyline. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm cup James had ordered for her, trying to calm the nerves fluttering in her chest. "So, Claire," James said, stirring his coffee, "what do you do when you're not dodging matchmaking attempts by your son?" She laughed despite herself. "I'm a graphic designer, freelance mostly. I work from home, which means I spend a lot of time convincing clients that just a small change isn't actually small. James chuckled. I know that feeling. She raised an eyebrow. You do? He nodded. I might run a company, but I still deal with people who think their last-minute changes won't completely derail a project. Claire smiled, a little surprised at how easy this conversation was becoming. Well, then you get it. Ethan, who had been dunking a cookie into his hot chocolate, suddenly perked up. Mom's really good at what she does. She made a logo for this big company once. James looked impressed. Oh yeah, which one? Claire hesitated, then waved a hand. It wasn't that big, just a startup that ended up doing pretty well. Ethan grinned. She won't say it, but they paid her a lot. James studied her. For a moment, his expression unreadable. You're talented then. Claire felt her face warm. She shrugged. I just do my best. For the next half hour, they talked, not about business or wealth, but about normal things. Claire learned that James had a younger sister who lived overseas, that he preferred reading books over watching TV, and that despite being a billionaire, he still loved the simple pleasure of a perfectly made cup of coffee. In return, Claire found herself sharing more than she expected. How she had raised Ethan on her own, how she had struggled to build a career while being a single mother, and how, despite everything, she wouldn't change a thing. Ethan, meanwhile, jumped into the conversation every chance he got, filling in gaps, adding his own commentary, and making both of them laugh more than once. But just as Claire was starting to feel truly comfortable, reality came crashing back in. A woman walked past their table, then stopped, eyes widening as she recognized James. Oh my gosh, she breathed, clutching her friend's arm. That's James Harrington. Whispers spread. People started glancing over, some pulling out their phones. A few even started approaching, their curiosity evident. Claire stiffened. This was the part she hadn't thought about. James wasn't just a regular guy. He was someone people noticed, someone people wanted something from. James sighed, rubbing his temple. He looked over at Claire, his expression apologetic. I should probably go before this turns into a scene. Claire nodded, though a strange pang of disappointment hit her. Yeah, I get it. Ethan frowned. Already? James glanced at him, then back at Claire. He hesitated, as if considering something. Then, finally, he pulled a business card from his pocket and slid it across the table toward her. If you ever want to get coffee again, he said, without an audience. Claire stared at the card. It wasn't just some generic office contact. It was his personal number. Her heart pounded. This was insane. Completely. Absolutely insane. But as she looked up at James, seeing the quiet sincerity in his eyes, she realized she didn't want to walk away from this moment. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something neither of them had expected. Claire stared at the business card, her fingers tracing the edges. Her mind raced with 100 different thoughts, but above all, she knew one thing. This wasn't normal. A billionaire CEO didn't just hand out his personal number to a woman he met at a cafe. Ethan, however, had no doubts. He grinned up at her, clearly impressed. See? I told you he likes you. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Ethan, it's just coffee. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. That night, after Ethan had gone to bed, she sat on her couch, staring at the card again. A part of her wanted to throw it away, pretend this whole thing had never happened. But another part, the one that had felt something shift in that cafe, wanted to text him. She picked up her phone, hesitated for what felt like forever, and finally typed out a message. Thanks for the coffee today. Ethan had a great time. She hovered over the send button, took a deep breath, and pressed it. To her surprise, The response came almost instantly. I did too. Hope he let you win at least one argument today. Claire laughed, shaking her head. Not a chance. From that moment, their conversations became a part of her daily life. It started with simple messages, light-hearted jokes, casual check-ins, but soon turned into late-night talks about everything from work stress to childhood memories. For the first time in years, Claire felt like someone truly saw her, not just as Ethan's mom, not just as a hardworking freelancer, but as a person. James too seemed different when he talked to her. With the world, he was the composed, sharp-minded CEO. But with Claire, he was just a man who loved quiet moments and simple joys. Then, one evening, after weeks of back and forth, James finally asked her out to dinner. A real date. Claire's first instinct was to say no. The idea of stepping into his world, even for a night, was terrifying. But when she looked at Ethan, who was practically bouncing with excitement, she knew she had already made her decision. Say, "Yes, Mom," Ethan begged. "You always tell me to try new things." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. Fine. That night, James picked her up in a sleek black car. But he wasn't the billionaire in expensive suits she'd seen in magazines. He was just James, the man who had made her laugh over coffee, who had listened to her struggles without judgment, who had made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Dinner was perfect, not because of the fancy restaurant or the elegant setting, but because for the first time in years, Claire felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. But just when she thought this might actually work, reality crashed down on them. The next morning, her phone buzzed non-stop. James Harrington, seen on romantic date with mystery woman. Who is the woman stealing the billionaire's heart? Claire's heart pounded as she scrolled through the articles. There were pictures of them from the restaurant, speculation about who she was, comments picking apart her appearance. She felt sick. Ethan, still half asleep, rubbed his eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" She forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some news." But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she could handle this. She had spent years building a quiet, stable life for herself and Ethan. She wasn't meant for this world. The world of constant attention, of judgment, of people prying into her life. Before she could even process it all, her phone rang. James. She hesitated, then answered. "Claire," he started, but she cut him off. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't be a headline, James. I have a son to think about." "I know," he said softly. "And I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful." Claire swallowed hard. "Maybe it's just better if we don't," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Don't push me away because you're scared. I know this is overwhelming, but I don't care about the headlines. I care about you." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this could work. But was love enough? Then, before she could respond, Ethan ran up, phone in hand. "Mom, look!" She blinked at the screen. James had just posted a statement. For anyone wondering, yes, I was on a date with an incredible woman who deserves more than to be treated like gossip. If you have something to say about me, fine, but leave her out of it. Claire stared at the words, feeling something shift inside her. He wasn't running from this. He wasn't hiding her. He was standing by her, no matter what. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the phone. "James," she said softly. "I'm here," he answered. She smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Okay, let's try." From that day on, Claire's life changed forever. There were challenges. Yes. Whispers. Articles. People who had opinions about her. But there was also something she hadn't had in a long time. Hope, and maybe, just maybe, a love worth fighting for.